All right, CBS Chief Executive Les Moonves announcing in an earnings call that the company wants to buy more TV stations if the incoming FCC Chairman Ajit Pai will scrap regulations restricting the number of TV stations that companies are allowed to own in media markets. Well, Mr. Moonves may soon get that chance. In an exclusive interview, his very first since taking over the agency, I sat down with Mr. Pai and I asked him a whole lot of questions, including what regulations he's prepared to cut, whether or not the Time Warner AT&T deal is actually going to happen, and why is it that celebrities keep swearing on network television. Watch.
I think we want to cut those regulations that are standing in the way of innovation and investments. When I travel around the country, what I've heard from Michigan to Mississippi, Washington State to Washington, D.C., is that there are a lot of rules that are on the books that are keeping companies from investing and innovating in high-speed internet access. And that's one of the things that we want to take a look at, because the consistent complaint I hear from consumers is that they want better, faster, cheaper internet. And to the extent that we can do something at the FCC to help change that equation, that's what I'm committed to doing. We're going to take a hard look at those regulations and try to figure out the way forward.
Let me turn to another big item in the news, and that's the AT&T Time Warner deal. The president has certainly been a fierce critic of the proposed deal. In fact, let me show this for the viewers so they know where he stands on it. Here we go.
As an example of the power structure I'm fighting, AT&T is buying Time Warner and thus CNN, a deal we will not approve in my administration because it's too much concentration of power in the hands of too few.
Ajit, is he right? Does this deal put too much power in the hands of just a few?
Well, two responses to that. First, I can't comment on any transaction that is pending. It certainly has not been presented to the FCC. And secondly, relating to that, my understanding is that the companies have agreed to structure the transaction in such a way that it won't require FCC review. So I'm afraid I can't opine on the merits of it.
So you're going to pass it off. It's all on the DOJ's shoulders.
Right, yeah, it's not, my understanding is it won't come before the FCC, so I'm probably going to stick within my lane on that one.
Well, it brings up an important issue, though, in terms of the size of these media companies, right? If they're out there making all these acquisitions, do they run the risk of getting too big?
Well, I think, generally speaking, we want to make sure that there's a competitive marketplace. And any transaction that is presented to me, I will apply the test that the FCC has long applied. Is the consummation of this deal in the public interest? Will consumers be better off? And if there is an anti-competitive harm that is shown to me based on the evidence, then we'll take the appropriate action.
When you look at the media landscape today, you see a whole lot of rules and regulations that haven't kept up with the times, really. I mean, this is something you brought up earlier. And I think about a 4-decade-old rule, for example, on the books that prohibits a media company from having both a print and a TV operation in the same market. As such, do you think some of these rules, do they need to change?
I think without question, some of our media regulations, which were largely crafted in 1975, have been outpaced by the realities of the marketplace. And you put your finger on it now, especially with the advent of the internet and people getting so much of their news from Facebook and Google and other online sources. It's become a really competitive marketplace. And so does it make sense for the FCC to maintain, for example, a restriction on a newspaper and a radio station in a small town in Kansas being able to combine forces and distribute news among multiple platforms? That's something the FCC needs to take a serious look at, because it disadvantages some of those newspapers and broadcast owners from doing what they do best, which is competing in a fair and marketplace.
So I guess